Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a time when survival didn't just depend on your strength, but on your will to endure the harshest of elements. Imagine waking up in medieval Scotland. The cold hits you before your eyes even open. And you're not lying on a warm bed with a fluffy duvet. Nope. You've got a thin blanket if you're lucky, a few layers of wool or fur, and a bed that's more like a slab of wood with some straw. That's your reality. The warmth, that's a distant memory, or something you might catch for a few minutes next to the fire, if you're fortunate enough so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Scotland's winters weren't just cold, they were downright brutal. With no central heating, no cozy blankets made of goose down, and often no way to fully keep the chill at bay. Medieval Scots had to contend with freezing temperatures that turned their homes into iceboxes. It wasn't just about a cold morning, it was about survival. Every day, you were fighting to stay warm, with little more than the clothes on your back and whatever meager fire you could tend to. If you were lucky enough to have a fire, it might take all day to get the room warm enough for you to even feel your fingers again. And even that relief would be brief heat rises, so you're often left standing near the hearth, trying to warm yourself by a tiny flame that could barely touch the chill of your stone-walled home. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually had a much higher tolerance to cold than we do now, given the constant battle they faced with the elements. Some believe that living through these harsh conditions might have made them more resilient to the chill. Others suggest that, despite their toughness, medieval people were just as vulnerable to the cold as we would be today, and the fight for warmth was a daily struggle. Either way, there's no denying that life in medieval Scotland was a constant battle against the elements. You've heard stories of how your ancestors survived, and maybe you've been told about how strong and hardy they were. But the truth is, survival wasn't about strength alone, it was about endurance. Enduring the cold, the hunger, the isolation. The brutality of a Scottish winter wasn't something people bounced back from. It was something they simply lived with, every year without much choice. As you get out of bed and feel the icy bite of the stone floor underfoot, you realize that survival was all about finding ways to endure. There's no magical solution to warmth, no cozy comforts waiting for you. You've got to make do with what you have. Worn, thick wool, maybe a dog by the fire, and an unshakable drive to keep moving despite everything telling you to stay in bed. But you can't afford that. If you don't work, you don't eat. And eating is not something you take for granted. Historians still debate whether the people of medieval Scotland had the psychological resilience to live through such harsh winters. Some believe the constant fight against the elements forged a strong mental will in the people. After all, if you survive year after year in such conditions, your mind becomes as tough as your body. Others argue that these winters led to constant mental strain, where the thought of surviving another winter became overwhelming, as though you were simply enduring until the next inevitable freeze. Either way, winter in Scotland didn't leave room for much but the will to survive, as the frost builds on your windows and the world outside remains frozen and bleak. There's no mistaking it, winter here isn't just a season. It's a way of life, one that dictates everything from what you wear to how you sleep, eat, and live. And it's something that will define every year of your life in this harsh, unforgiving land. The next morning, as you wake up again to the same chill, it doesn't take long to realize that you've hardly made it through the night without feeling like you've been fighting the cold all over again. The cold seeps through every crack. In your small cottage, from the thatched roof to the stone floors beneath your feet, even the smallest gaps in the walls let in drafts that make it hard to keep anything warm. and the fire barely holds enough heat to feel like more than a smoke-filled annoyance. You bundle yourself up in layers of wool, maybe a scrap of fur if you're lucky. But the warmth never quite comes so, before you get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The reality of medieval Scotland is that comfort was rare and fleeting. The frost you feel when you wake up is always present in the air, in the stone of your walls, in your very bones. Every breath you take in is cold. It feels like your lungs are filled with icy shards that cut straight through your sards. They cut straight through your sard, your chest, and there's no reprieve from it. No blankets large enough, no fire hot enough. There's no modern heating, just the slow, persistent battle against the elements. And you're the only one left standing between yourself and a world that feels determined to freeze you out. Historians still argue whether the people of medieval Scotland simply learned to live with the constant cold, whether they adapted to it so fully that they no longer felt it in the same way we would today. Some suggest that the people became accustomed to the biting cold, and that it was a part of their identity, a badge of endurance, if you will. Others claim that the constant exposure to freezing temperatures must have taken a psychological toll, forcing people into a cycle of survival where there was no time for rest or relaxation. Either way, one thing is clear: cold wasn't something you just got used to. It was a part of life, and its effects were ever present. When you venture outside into the open air, the wind cuts right through your layers, and the snow comes at you in violent, blinding gusts. There's no cover, just endless hills of snow, rocks, and trees. Some bare, others barely able to hold on to their few weak branches. The world around you is unforgiving, and the wild landscape of medieval Scotland offers little in the way of shelter or comfort. The land itself feels like it's fighting you with the winds that make it impossible to move without. Feeling like you're being driven back by an invisible force, historians debate whether the harshness of the Scottish landscape was as dangerous and unforgiving as it seems, or whether people found ways to navigate the land without fully acknowledging how unwelcoming it was. Some believe that the Scots of the medieval period used their intimate knowledge of the land, natural resources, and weather to survive, adapting to their environment in ways that made them masters of their harsh world. Others suggest that the unyielding land, paired with the unrelenting weather, made life difficult not just physically, but mentally, leading people to endure hardships that we can hardly comprehend today. Either way, it's clear that Scotland's landscape shaped everything from daily survival to the overall mood of the people who lived there. Every single day was a fight for survival. Even after a night that felt like you'd already given everything you had, whether you were working the land, gathering food, or simply trying to keep a fire burning, there was no moment when you could let your guard down. You're surrounded by cold, by isolation, and by the wilds that don't care about your survival. The land doesn't welcome you, it tests you. It takes everything you have to get by, and still, the battle never ends. And it wasn't just about staying warm, but staying alive long enough to make it to the next season. Historians argue whether medieval people lived in fear of the land, always at the mercy of nature's whims, or whether they respected it as something they could control with enough effort. Some argue that people lived with the knowledge that survival was never guaranteed, and they constantly faced the reality that they were always fighting against nature. Others suggest that resilience, combined with an intimate knowledge of the land, helped medieval Scots face the elements with confidence. Either way, there was never a guarantee that any season would be less brutal than the last. The winter months felt like a never-ending challenge, an unyielding battle that defined your existence. As the days stretch on, the harshness of medieval Scottish winters isn't just felt in the cold, but in the way it strips everything away. The landscape becomes almost inhospitable, and the people who survive here are forced into a constant state of adaptation. For those living in the countryside, the rugged terrain isn't just difficult to traverse, it's treacherous. The mountains, the swamps, the forests, they all become obstacles that make even simple tasks feel like monumental challenges. Every journey outside is a test of your will to survive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe down. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The harshness of winter in medieval Scotland isn't something you can escape from, no matter how hard you try. The isolation you feel is compounded by the landscape, which doesn't offer much in the way of shelter. The very mountains that might seem majestic to some are actually cold, unyielding walls that separate you from other villages and the outside world. If you've got a bad crop, or if the cold has made the roads impassable, you're stuck. You might be waiting months before help can even arrive, and in that time, you've got to make do with what little you have. You even have anything at all. Historians still debate whether medieval Scots truly understood the danger of their environment, or if they simply accepted it as a fact of life. Some argue that the people of Scotland learned to live with the land, making the most of the resources they had, even if it meant constantly adapting to the elements. Others believe that the harshness of the land and weather left the people in a constant state of vulnerability with little control over the conditions that surrounded them. Either way, one thing is clear: survival was never guaranteed. And the environment wasn't a kind one. But even if you do survive the cold, the work is far from over. You might have your fields to tend to, your animals to care for, and your home to maintain. But it all feels like a never-ending task. The work itself is never done. Whether you're gathering firewood or repairing your roof, there's always something more to do. You spend your days working until exhaustion, only to wake up and do it all over again the next day. And it's all for survival, because comfort is a luxury that few people in medieval Scotland could afford. Historians argue whether the medieval Scots truly saw this work as a necessary evil, or whether they saw it as a form of purpose. Some suggest that they found meaning in the toil of everyday life, building strong communities through collective labor. Others believe that the constant work was just a way to pass the time until the next season arrived, that people were simply enduring until survival was no longer an issue. Either way, there's no question that the mental toll of constant labor combined with the elements made life in medieval Scotland as difficult as it was. Every day spent in the cold, with a body working to keep you alive, becomes more of a fight than a lifestyle. Even in the mildest winters, the people are worn down by their endurance, and the long nights offer little respite. The effort required to keep yourself and your family alive is a constant strain on your physical and mental health. Yet, in a way, that fight for survival becomes a part of your identity. It's who you rue. Don't just live through the winter. You conquer it day after day. Historians still debate whether medieval people saw their struggles as personal triumphs, or whether the cold and hardship made them view life more as a grind to endure. Some suggest that the sense of accomplishment from surviving difficult winters created a sense of pride that sustained medieval Scots through each year. Others argue that this constant struggle contributed to a sense of resignation, where the only goal was simply to make it through. Either way, survival in medieval Scotland wasn't just a matter of staying alive. It was about facing the elements head-on and figuring out how to survive another season. Even as the days stretch longer and you see the first signs of spring, there's no escaping the harsh reality of life in medieval Scotland. Sure, the cold might be easing off, but survival isn't just about enduring the winter. the land has been scarred by months of freezing temperatures, and you're left to pick up the pieces. It's hard to think of renewal when the crops you've planted are barely surviving, and even the strongest plants are struggling to push through the cold, damp earth. The thawing world is slow to recover, and with it, you feel like you're starting over, but with far fewer resources than you had before. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, as the earth starts to thaw and the first shoots of new life begin to emerge. There's a brief moment of hope, but it's fleeting. You've just made it through another harsh winter, and the effort to rebuild seems overwhelming. The fields are bare, the land is weakened from months of frost, and even with the warmth returning, you know it's going to take time to restore. The fertility of the soil, the idea of abundance seems far off. What you grow might not be enough to last you through the next cold season, but that's just it. Survival doesn't allow for the luxury of certainty. Historians still argue whether medieval Scots saw spring as a time of renewal or simply as the beginning of another struggle. Some suggest that the return of warmer weather brought a new sense of possibility, allowing people to recharge and get ready for the next round of harsh work. Others believe that the effort to recover from winter and prepare for the next one left people feeling just as drained as they had during the cold months. Either way, the transition from winter to spring was more of a mental shift than a true relief as you work to clear the fields. Plant what seeds you can and try to repair. Your home, the idea of security seems distant. Each year, you start over with nothing but your will to survive and the barest of resources. The grinding reality of medieval life is that you never stop fighting. Spring isn't a time of peace, just another reminder of the unrelenting cycle you face. Each day brings new challenges, new needs, new ways the world tests your ability to live through it. The landscape might be softer now, but it's still dangerous, still a place that can freeze, starve, and weaken you when you least expect it. Historians debate whether medieval societies were able to adapt to this constant state of survival, or whether they simply learned to endure it with a sense of resignation. Some believe that the people of medieval Scotland thrived in their communities, coming together to face the hardship of every season, while others argue that the constant battle left them in a state of mental exhaustion, always fearing the next trial. Either way, life in Scotland was about endurance, and you never knew whether the next season would be more brutal than the last. As the months move on and the weather shifts, you realize that the brutal cycle of survival isn't just about winter anymore, it's about year-round struggle. Even when the temperature rises, the land is still difficult. The crops may grow, but they don't always yield enough to provide for a whole family. Animals might have died off over the cold months, and your farm isn't quite what it used to be. You might get a little lucky with your harvest, but you know that winter's grip is still just around the corner. You're never truly safe. Survival means finding the resources, the strength, and the perseverance to keep going. Historians argue whether medieval people saw this continuous cycle of survival as an unavoidable part of life, or whether they ever dreamed of breaking free from it. Some believe that the constant cycle of planting, growing, and harvesting taught them to see life in seasons. Each part of the year was just a different kind of survival. Others suggest that the harshness of medieval life led to a sense of hopelessness, where people simply learned to live in fear of the next winter. Either way, the idea that winter was a time of brutal survival and that spring meant more hard work shaped not just the lives of those who lived in Scotland, but also the way they thought about their future. As you continue through the warmer months, the threat of winter is never far from your mind. The idea of a bountiful harvest may seem within reach, but you also know how fragile that hope is. A single storm, a stretch of bad weather, or a sudden frost could destroy everything you've worked for. Scotland's weather is as unpredictable as it is harsh, and even in the best of times, you're always one disaster away from losing everything. Every grain you sow, every animal you care for, and every effort you make feels like it's a gamble against the cold, and the odds are rarely in your favor. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe down now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The relentless cycle of hard work, followed by the constant threat of loss, wears on your spirit. As you toil in the fields, you're never truly at rest. The weather is always hovering on the edge of turning, threatening to undo all your efforts. There's no sense of security here, no modern comforts to fall back on when things go wrong. One poor harvest, and you're left with nothing. There's no emergency fund, no safety net. What you have is what you've earned, and if nature doesn't cooperate, you're forced to rely on your own resourcefulness to survive. Historians debate whether people in medieval Scotland ever truly felt like they could control their fate. Some argue that the constant work and adaptation to the environment fostered a sense of agency. You worked for what you had, and survival depended on how well you could manage what little you had. Others suggest that the harshness of the environment kept people in a constant state of vulnerability, where survival was always a matter of luck. Either way, the unrelenting nature of the land made certainty a rare luxury. In a land like Scotland, trust is hard to come by. You never really know whether the harvest will yield enough to feed you and your family, whether the animals you raise will survive the coming cold, or whether your neighbors will help you when the time comes. Communities are small, but survival means cooperation, and the competition for resources is fierce. It's not uncommon for families to fight over the land, over food, or even over a chance to get ahead. Every winter, you see neighbors who used to help one another now looking for ways to outlast each other. The harshness of life here creates an environment of struggle, but it also cultivates a sense of solidarity as it divides. Historians still debate whether medieval Scots truly lived in constant fear of their neighbors, or whether they learned to live in an environment where cooperation was vital to survival. Some suggest that the harsh realities of life forced people to look out for one another, forging bonds that made them stronger. Others argue that the competition for resources created rivalries and led to hostility between families, even communities. Either way, medieval life in Scotland was a tightrope walk between the need to cooperate and the constant temptation to compete. As you reflect on the seasons that pass, it becomes clear: survival in medieval Scotland isn't just about weathering the storm, it's about making sure that you've got enough to survive the next one. The cold months are a reminder that there's always another challenge on the horizon. Even as you look forward to the promise of spring, you know that the work will never stop. The grind of survival, the fight against the elements, and the constant demand to adapt will continue year after year. There's no escaping the fact that life in medieval Scotland is one continuous struggle to survive. A struggle to endure. Historians argue whether the constant cycle of survival made people resilient, or whether it led to mental exhaustion. Some believe that the hard conditions forced medieval Scots to become more resourceful, to think on their feet, and to work together to make it through the harsh winters. Others argue that the never-ending grind of survival took a psychological toll, leaving people disillusioned, unable to break free from the cycle of hardship. Either way, survival in medieval Scotland meant you had to learn to endure. That meant embracing resilience as your most powerful tool. As the months continue to pass, the constant struggle for survival seems endless. The seasons may change, but the demand to endure never lets up. When spring gives way to summer, there's a brief sense of relief, but it's quickly overshadowed by the knowledge that harvest time is always uncertain. You work hard through the warmer months, trying to ensure that your crops grow strong and that your animals are well cared for. But there's always that nagging sense of vulnerability. No matter how much you plan, there's always the chance that the weather won't cooperate or that the land will fail you, just as it has so many times before. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe button. Only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Summer might offer some respite from the cold, but it brings its own set of challenges. You're constantly watching the skies, praying for good weather, but never knowing whether it will rain too much, not enough, or come at the wrong time. The land is always a gamble, and despite the work you put in, the results can feel like luck, not skill. There's no modern technology to predict the seasons, to give you even a sliver of certainty about what's coming next. The weather is still in control. Even as you watch your crops grow, there's always the fear that the next frost, drought, or storm could undo all your hard work. And farming in Scotland isn't an easy task to begin with. The soil is often thin and poor, and the weather isn't always kind enough to help your efforts. Historians argue whether medieval Scots relied more on experience or superstition when it came to farming. Some argue that the people of the land had a deep, intuitive knowledge of their environment passed down through generations, allowing them to better predict the rhythms of the seasons and make the most of what they had. Others suggest that medieval people were more likely to rely on superstition, believing that the good fortune of a crop was the result of divine favor or ritual rather than any true understanding of the land. Either way, the threat of losing everything was always present, and the mental burden of that threat weighed on the people's daily lives. As autumn approaches, you begin to prepare for what's to come, whether you're ready or not. The harvest season is the culmination of all your hard work, but it's also a time when your survival could hinge on the success of your crops. The cold is just a few months away, and you're not sure if you'll have enough to make it through. You find yourself counting every last bushel of grain, wishing for a better outcome, hoping that this time the harvest will last long enough to get you through the winter months. You never quite feel safe, because survival in Scotland isn't just about gathering, it's about making it last. Historians still debate whether medieval people truly saw harvest time as a moment of hope or a moment of stress. Some suggest that harvests were seen as the only time to truly rejoice, but that the thought of the coming winter often overshadowed that celebration. Others believe that the stress of uncertainty kept people in a constant state of worry, unable to fully relax, even after a successful harvest. Either way, there's no question that autumn brought with it the heavy burden of preparing for winter, because without a successful harvest, survival was no guarantee. And so, the cycle continues. Winter will come again, and no matter what happens. During the warmer months, you know that the battle is never truly over. Even after a season of successful harvests, you're already looking to the next year, trying to figure out how to make it through the next brutal cold snap, how to protect your crops from the coming frost, and how to make sure you have enough to feed yourself and your family. The cycle of survival is a never-ending process, constant fight against the elements, and against a world that doesn't care whether you survive. Historians still argue whether the people of medieval Scotland felt more like they were at the mercy of the seasons, or whether they felt that survival was a matter of effort, resilience, and community. Some suggest that medieval Scots truly believed in their ability to control their fate through hard work, while others argue that fate was something beyond their control, and that they simply endured as best as they could. Either way, life in Scotland was about perpetual survival, knowing that the land you lived on and the weather that came with it could change at any moment. As the dark days of winter approach again, the tension of anticipation settles in. You know what's coming: the cold, the isolation, the relentless battle for survival. It feels like a grim ritual that repeats every year, and no matter how much you've prepared, there's always that lingering fear that it won't be enough. The food stores are stocked, the firewood is piled high, but you can't help but feel the weight of uncertainty. The cold doesn't just freeze the body, it freezes the mind too. You know that if winter strikes hard enough, nothing will matter, not the effort, not the work you've put in, not the hope you held on to during the warmer months. The bitter cold could still steal it all away. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've worked so hard to prepare, storing grain, preserving what food you could, ensuring that the firewood is ready, but no matter how much you prepare, you can't control the weather. It's a fact that haunts you year after year. The fear that the snow could come too early or the frost too harsh. The thought that your efforts might be in vain. And when the days shorten and the sunlight disappears too quickly behind the hills, you find yourself dreading the cold even before it arrives. Winter in Scotland doesn't just take away warmth, it takes away your hope. Historians still debate whether medieval people had a true understanding of what the cold could do to them, or if they were simply forced to accept it as part of their existence. Some argue that they understood the cold as a necessary part of life, that they had adapted to it over the years and learned to expect the hardship. Others suggest that the mental toll of surviving year after year made the cold a constant reminder of their mortality, something they couldn't escape no matter how hard they tried. Either way, winter remained the greatest enemy, one that no one could defeat completely. And yet, as winter approaches, the rituals of survival remain. The work must continue. You need to gather what little food is left, check on your livestock, and ensure that your family is well prepared for the long months ahead. But there's no denying that even with your preparations, the feeling of helplessness never goes away. You can stack your firewood and fill your pantries to the brim, but the cold always finds its way in. The land may be covered in snow, but the cold doesn't stop at the door, it creeps inside. No matter how tightly you close your shutters or how thick you layer the walls, historians argue whether medieval societies truly understood how vulnerable they were to the forces of nature, or whether they simply accepted it as an unchangeable part of their existence. Some argue that the idea of survival was ingrained in their culture, that they were resilient and took pride in their ability to endure whatever nature threw at them. Others suggest that the constant fear of the elements created an unspoken sense of paranoia, where the threat of winter was always hovering, always on the edge of certainty. Either way, life was never easy, and survival was always a matter of adaptation. But there's a strange comfort in knowing that, at least for now, you've survived another season. You've lived through another harsh winter, and you're preparing for the next one. But survival, especially in a place like medieval Scotland, isn't just about staying alive. It's about adapting to the rhythms of the world around you. The cold, the snow, the isolation, they're all part of the cycle of life here. You survive by learning to embrace the challenges as they come. Historians still argue whether medieval Scots ever truly felt like they could ever escape the cycle of winter and hardship. Some suggest that they came to view each winter as just another part of their normal rhythm, while others believe that they were constantly haunted by the knowledge that the cold could return at any time. Either way, it's clear that winter, and all it brought with it, was a defining part of life in medieval Scotland. the people's ability to endure it marked their strength. As winter stretches its grip into the early months, you can't help but feel that familiar dread creeping back in. Each year, it seems like you're never truly prepared enough, no matter how much firewood you stack, how much grain you store, or how tightly you seal your door against the cold. It's a feeling that defines medieval Scottish winters, the sense that you are always one step behind the elements. The storms are relentless, the nights long, and the cold cuts deeper than tides. Nights deeper than you thought possible? And just as it feels like you've settled into the rhythm of survival, the snow begins to fall, and everything starts again. The cycle of cold starts anew, and you brace yourself for the inevitable dot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe down. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The winter winds howl as you hear them tearing through the trees, the only sound in a world that feels frozen. As the snow drifts over the land, your village is locked in the quiet, cold embrace of winter. The hearth is always smoldering, trying to hold back the encroaching chill, but you know it's never enough. You can feel the drafts creeping in from every corner of the room, the icy fingers of winter that refuse to be kept out. There's no true warmth, just a constant struggle to make do with what little you have. And yet, despite all this, you know that this too is survival. Every day you endure, every day you keep fighting to stay warm, means you're still alive. Historians argue whether medieval Scots simply grew used to the cold, whether they reached a point of accepting it as part of their lives, or whether the cold was something they truly feared. Some believe that the people of Scotland saw winter as an inevitable part of life and found ways to live alongside it. Others suggest that the cold was a constant source of anxiety and stress, making the fight for survival even harder. Either way, it's clear that winter in medieval Scotland wasn't something you simply endured, it was a part of life that shaped everything you did. As the days drag on and the cold becomes unbearable, the people of the village come together to share what little warmth there is. The fire crackles in the hearth, but it's never enough to fully warm your bones. You sit in silence, surrounded by others doing the same. The community becomes a lifeline, not just for practical help, but for morale. In the darkest of times, it's the shared struggle that binds you together. The food may be scarce, but the company is not. And as you pass the meager meal around, you find comfort in the fact that you are not alone in your suffering. Historians still debate whether medieval people relied on community to survive the brutal winters, or if they truly depended on individual resilience. Some believe that communal efforts were the cornerstone of survival in harsh times, with neighbors looking out for each other. Others argue that people were forced to rely more on individual strength and personal resourcefulness, only coming together when absolutely necessary. Either way, the collective endurance of the people through the winter months was essential to survival. The psychological toll of living in constant fear of winter's return is something you feel every day. You never know if this winter will be as brutal as the last, or if you'll lose more than just a few crops or livestock. The uncertainty is a heavy burden that never leaves your mind. You carry it with you from one season to the next. Not just about physical survival, your mental fortitude is tested too. Hope becomes a luxury you can't afford. Every day, you push yourself to get through the next hour, the next day, always with the knowledge that winter is the true test of your endurance. Historians argue whether medieval Scots truly felt hopeful about the future, or whether their sense of survival was rooted in desperation. Some believe that the will to survive was enough to propel people forward, even in the darkest times. Others suggest that the constant struggle for survival led to a sense of hopelessness, where each season felt like a fight against an inevitable, unchangeable reality. Either way, winter in medieval Scotland wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about surviving the mental strain that came with it. As the weeks of winter stretch into months, the darkness seems to stretch along with them. Days are short, and even when the sun does rise, its warmth barely makes a dent against the cold. You've become accustomed to the gray skies and the sense that the world outside has frozen in place, just like you. It's as though the weight of the winter has become an invisible force pressing down on you. You can almost feel it in your bones, in the ache of your tired muscles, in the numbness that settles in after you've worked too long in the cold. But you keep going because survival means more than just physical endurance. It means mentally pushing through, even when everything around you feels like it's holding you back. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video. And subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Living through winter in medieval Scotland isn't just about weathering the cold, it's about dealing with the psychological strain of enduring it. There's a deep loneliness that sets in during these long months. Even though you may be surrounded by others in your village, the isolation still feels palpable. Cottage walls can be thin, and the wind cuts through cracks in the structure. But the true loneliness comes from the grind of survival itself. It's a battle fought within your mind, a constant push to keep going even when everything around you screams for you to stop. Historians argue whether people in medieval Scotland ever truly felt connected to the communities around them, or if the cold and the isolation of their environment forced them into a kind of self-sufficiency that made them emotionally distant. Some suggest that the close-knit villages provided enough support to foster a sense of solidarity even through the toughest winters. Others argue that the constant hardship and fear of scarcity left people emotionally shut off, merely surviving, rather than truly living. Either way, the isolation of winter shaped the people of Scotland in ways we can't fully understand. As the days get shorter, you know the routine. There's the daily struggle to keep warm, to keep your family fed, and to make sure your animals don't freeze or starve. Even as the snow piles up outside, the tasks don't stop. The work is relentless. You feel your muscles aching from the constant labor of maintaining the hearth, the house, and the land, all while trying to stave off the cold that makes everything harder. Every action becomes fueled by necessity, with no room for luxury or comfort. The food you've managed to store, though precious, only goes so far. You ration carefully, each meal a reminder of how fragile your existence truly is. Historians debate whether medieval Scots truly accepted the grind of survival as a part of daily life, or whether they resented the constant toil that came with it. Some suggest that the hard work of farming, hunting, and gathering was an essential part of their identity, a symbol of their connection to the land and the people they lived with. Others suggest that the harsh reality of daily survival made people resentful, not just of the land, but of the very concept of existence itself. Either way, it's clear that endurance wasn't a choice, was a necessity. Despite everything, there's still a kind of beauty in surviving winter. Even as you struggle through the blizzards and the frost, you find small moments of solace. A family member sharing a meal, a brief reprieve by the fire, a quiet evening spent working together to keep warm. These moments are fleeting, but they give you the strength to keep going. Survival isn't about grand triumphs, it's about those small, fleeting victories against the world that seems determined to break you. Historians argue whether the medieval concept of community survival was more about shared sacrifice or individual resilience. Some believe that people found strength in community, knowing that they weren't alone in their struggle. Others suggest that medieval people were often isolated by the conditions, relying more on self-sufficiency to make it through. Either way, the mental and physical toll of surviving in medieval Scotland was something that could never truly be overcome. It was just part of life. As winter grinds on, you realize that survival is more than just a matter of braving the elements. It's a test of endurance, of will, and of hope. The cold will eventually pass, the seasons will change. But the toll it takes is felt long after the snow has melted and the sun begins to shine. The battle against winter is never truly over. You've made it through another one, but there's always the next. As the snow finally begins to melt and spring inches closer, there's a strange mix of relief and trepidation. The promise of warmer weather is there. But it comes with the realization that even after surviving the grueling winter, the harsh cycle of survival in medieval Scotland is far from over. The thawing earth brings its own challenges now. The work shifts from survival in the cold to ensuring that you're ready for the coming season of planting, harvesting, and preparing for whatever the land throws your way. But spring isn't just about planting seeds. It's about repairing what the cold and winter have damaged. The land may be thawing, but the toll is still visible in the battered crops, the weak animals, and the depleted stores sow before you. Get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The reality of spring is that it doesn't feel like a fresh start. There's a grim reminder in every thawing patch of earth. Every new bud that begins to bloom, the battle is far from over. You've survived the cold and the hunger, but now you must face the uncertainty of whether your crops will thrive, or if you'll be forced to endure another poor harvest. The scarcity of the past months never really leaves your mind. Even as new shoots begin to appear, you know that the future is always at the mercy of nature. Historians still debate whether medieval Scots saw spring as a time of renewal or as just another round in the cycle of struggle. Some believe that spring brought a true sense of hope, as the thawing earth meant that survival wasn't just possible, it was now a little more likely. Others suggest that the psychological toll of winter meant that even as things began to warm, people didn't have much optimism about the future. They had simply learned to expect hardship. Either way, spring brought its own set of challenges. Even in the best of times, spring in Scotland wasn't a time to relax. The fields needed tending, the livestock required care, and the threat of poor weather still loomed. The work felt endless. There was no time to rest, because each day of good weather was a fleeting opportunity to prepare for the next hardship. And yet, for all the effort, the results were never certain. The land could be unpredictable: too much rain, too little, the wrong kind of cold snap, and you were left with nothing for all your efforts. Historians argue whether the harshness of medieval farming made people see agriculture as a test of their endurance, or whether it was more of a necessary evil. Some argue that the people of Scotland had a deep connection to the land, making the hard work feel like a rite of passage that tied them to the earth. Others suggest that the constant grind of farming led to resentment and weariness, where the efforts were never enough to provide any real comfort. Either way, medieval Scotland was a place where survival never came easy, and the cycle of work and hardship was never far from people's thoughts. You spend the months of spring and summer in a constant state of vigilance, knowing that every good day is followed by a potential storm. The land, as harsh as it is, provides the only means of survival, and yet you constantly worry whether it will provide enough. The idea of self-sufficiency becomes more of a wish than a reality. You're always at the mercy of the seasons, and The cold, brutal reality of Scotland's climate keeps you grounded in the understanding that survival doesn't come easily. You're always fighting, always adapting, always looking to the next season, hoping that it will bring just enough relief to get you through. Historians debate whether medieval Scots ever truly relaxed in the face of adversity, or whether they lived their lives in a state of constant survival mode. Some believe that the constant struggle made people more resilient, able to endure the worst of the weather and hardship. Others suggest that the endless work left them mentally exhausted, always looking ahead to the next challenge and never able to truly rest. Either way, one thing is clear. In medieval Scotland, survival wasn't a given. It was a daily fight. As the days grow longer and you start to see more daylight, you feel an odd sense of weariness creep in. The work hasn't stopped, and you feel it in your bones, the endless cycle of harvest, preparation, and survival. You've made it through. The harsh winters, the constant frost, and the vulnerability that comes with the cold. But now there's a new fear to deal with. Even though it's not the dead of winter, the threat of starvation is still a real possibility. You've got your crops in the ground, but how much will you actually harvest? There's no guarantee, and your hard work might not yield enough food to survive the coming winter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The weight of uncertainty never leaves. The threat of a pour. Harvest haunts you throughout the warmer months. No matter how much effort you put into the land, there's always the nagging feeling that nature might not cooperate. You might spend all season tending your crops only to watch them fail when the rain stops or the frost arrives too early. It's a constant balancing act, trying to stay ahead of the forces you can't control. The idea of guaranteed abundance is a foreign concept in Scotland's harsh environment. Historians argue whether medieval Scots were more accepting of this uncertainty or whether they lived in constant fear of failure. Some suggest that people learned to live with the knowledge that no matter how hard they worked, the land might still fail them. Others argue that they constantly sought ways to improve their chances, using innovative farming techniques and customs passed down through generations. Either way, the battle against nature was a never-ending struggle, and winter was always just around the corner, lurking, waiting to test your efforts. You can feel the pressure build as the harvest season draws near. You've worked tirelessly, but you never really know what the land will give you. A good harvest means surviving, but a bad one could mean a long, hungry winter. You watch the skies closely, hoping for the rain to come at the right time, hoping that the soil will hold the nourishment your crops need. There's no backup plan. There's no safety net. Your survival is tied to the land, and the land is unpredictable. Historians debate whether medieval Scots had a deep understanding of the risks that came with farming, or whether they simply accepted it as an inherent part of their existence. Some suggest that people in Scotland were optimistic, holding on to the belief that if they worked hard enough, the land would reward them. Others believe that the constant uncertainty left people feeling helpless, knowing that the slightest change in the weather could destroy their hopes. Either way, survival wasn't just about effort, it was about luck. And you were never sure how much you had. As the days slip by, you know the stakes are high. You've lived through so much, and you've survived. But the thought of winter still looms large. It's never far from your mind. Because no matter how well you've planned or how hard you've worked, winter could undo it all. Even after months of labor, a single cold snap or blight could leave you with nothing. But you keep pushing forward, because that's what survival requires. Even in the face of relentless uncertainty, you can't afford to stop. You can't afford to give up. Historians still argue whether medieval people saw survival as a personal triumph or whether they viewed it as inevitable, given the hard work and resilience required. Some suggest that people saw each season as another battle to be won, building strength and character with each challenge they faced. Others suggest that medieval people never really felt a sense of victory. They just lived in a constant state of endurance, constantly pushing against forces beyond their control. Either way, life in medieval Scotland was defined by survival. And every season added another layer to the long story of endurance. By the time autumn rolls around, the work isn't finished. It's far from it. There's an air of exhaustion that hangs heavy over the village. The crops you've managed to bring in are less than you hoped for, and the work that's left is far from done. The leaves may be changing color, signaling the end of the growing season. But for you, the work never stops. You've spent months tending to your land, gathering food, trying to get everything in place, and now you face the grueling task of preparing for winter once again. The cold will return, and you need to make sure you have enough to survive it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. There's a sharp awareness that settles in during autumn, the reminder that no matter how much you've harvested or how much firewood you've stacked, winter is an unavoidable fact of life in Scotland. The days are getting shorter, the nights colder, and soon enough, the winds will bring the snow again. Everything you've done in the past months feels like it's leading to this final test of your ability to survive. Winter is a relentless force that comes without warning, and no matter how much you prepare, you know that it can still catch you off guard. Historians debate whether medieval Scots were ever truly prepared for winter, or whether they simply lived in constant uncertainty, never knowing whether their preparations would be enough. Some believe that the people of Scotland understood the land and its rhythms so well that they could reliably prepare for the worst. Others argue that farming and gathering were always a gamble, and that no amount of preparation could ensure survival when nature was so unpredictable. Either way, the cold that would come was a reminder that nothing in life was certain as the fireplace begins to crackle, and the smell of roasting meat fills the air. You realize that the grind of survival never truly ends. There are moments of comfort, a warm meal, the closeness of family, the fire in your hearth, but they are fleeting. You cannot afford to rest. Your storehouse is full, but even now, you wonder whether it will be enough to get you through another brutal winter. The cold, after all, does not just take your food, it takes your hope. And without hope, survival becomes much harder. Historians argue whether the medieval Scots saw hope as a necessary component of survival, or whether they learned to live without it, simply accepting the grind of daily life. Some believe that hope was the spark that kept people moving forward, even in the harshest of times. Others suggest that people in medieval Scotland were forced to live without hope, simply enduring until the next season arrived. Either way, it's clear that winter was the ultimate test of resilience, and hope played a significant role in how people survived. The mental toll of constantly preparing for the cold, of living in a perpetual state of uncertainty, weighs heavily on you. The hard work never stops, and the fear that you won't have enough to get by is always there. Even though you've survived another season, you're already thinking about the next one. There's always something to prepare for, something to fear, and in the back of your mind, you know that winter is the ultimate threat. No matter how much you prepare, the cold is always waiting. Historians still debate whether medieval people saw winter as an inevitable fate to be endured, or whether they tried to fight back against it, using every ounce of their strength to survive. Some argue that people in medieval Scotland simply accepted the hardships of life as part of the natural order and got used to the constant grind. Others believe that the harsh conditions of winter led people to become more determined, using everything they had to ensure their survival. Either way, winter was the ultimate trial, and surviving it was what defined life in Scotland. As winter settles in, the relentless cold presses on. You feel its bite every day as it seeps into your bones, no matter how many layers you pile on. The snow falls thick, blanketing everything in a harsh layer of white, turning the land into a cold, unforgiving wasteland. The world outside is still, almost eerie, but within the walls of your home, there's little reprieve. The fire crackles in the hearth, but it doesn't provide enough warmth to truly thaw your chilled skin. Your hands are cold as you try to focus on the work at hand mending clothes, preparing meals, making sure that your family can make it through another day. And yet, it feels like no matter how much you do, the cold always wins. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe down now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Surviving in medieval Scotland during the dead of winter isn't about comfort. It's about endurance. The ability to continue, to keep going when everything around you makes it feel like the cold might win. The cold is never truly defeated. It lingers in the corners of your home, in the stones of your cottage, in the air you breathe. Even as the snow drifts outside, the real battle is the one you fight in your own mind. Will you give in to despair? Or will you rise up, again and again, to meet the relentless challenge of survival? Historians argue whether the cold of winter truly shaped the mental state of medieval Scots, or if it was the constant struggle to survive that left a lasting impact on the psyche. Some suggest that the harsh winters created a deep-seated resilience, a mental toughness forged through years of enduring the harsh conditions. Others claim that the cold left people in a perpetual state of fatigue and mental exhaustion, always fighting just to stay warm, always fearing the worst. Either way, there's no denying that winter became more than just a season. It became a defining part of life in medieval Scotland. Every day feels like a repetition of the last. You rise, you work, you endure. You check your stores, you mend what's broken, and you try to keep your family warm, but it always feels like you're one step behind. There's no easy way to get through the winter. It's a constant test of your will to endure. And yet, even as the world outside remains frozen, you continue to fight, knowing that survival is the only thing that matters. Historians still debate whether medieval Scots truly understood the mental toll that came with constant survival, or whether they simply accepted it as part of life. Some argue that people were more optimistic, using the long, cold months as an opportunity to rest and prepare for the coming seasons. Others suggest that the mental strain of constant hardship made people resigned, always pushing through without ever feeling truly secure. Either way, winter was a battle, and the toll it took on the people was as heavy as the snow that piled up around them. As the cold drags on, the physical toll of surviving winter becomes clear. Your hands are raw from working in the cold, your feet numb from walking through the snow. You are exhausted mentally, physically, and emotionally. Every day feels like a battle, and yet you know you must keep going. There's no choice. Winter doesn't wait for you to rest. It doesn't care how tired you are. It simply comes, and you have to face it, no matter how weary you are. But despite the hardships, there's still something in you that pushes forward. The will to survive, to endure, is strong. Historians argue whether medieval people truly believed they were capable of surviving winter, or whether they simply endured out of sheer necessity. Some argued that they saw winter as a time to prove their strength, to show that they could survive no matter how brutal the season. Others suggest that they felt more like victims, constantly at the mercy of the weather, always fearing that it would be too much. Either way, the fight for survival in medieval Scotland was a constant, and it was a struggle that defined life throughout the long, harsh winters. As the nights stretch longer and the cold becomes more pervasive, you can't help but feel the pressure weighing on you more than ever before. The fear of starvation, of the elements taking over, creeps into every moment. Even when the fireplace is crackling and you're huddled under layers of wool and fur, you still feel the cold that never really goes away. It's a constant companion, a reminder that survival is fragile. As the frost begins to creep along the edges of the windows, the thought of the days ahead, days of endurance and hardship, feels almost unbearable. There is no way to escape the reality of winter in medieval Scotland. You can only face it head on and keep moving forward. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The darkness of winter isn't just the lack of sunlight, it's the sense of limitation that it brings. Every day, you find yourself thinking of ways to conserve what you have left. The grain you've stored, the firewood piled high, the last bits of dried meat, it all feels like it could disappear in an instant, leaving you with nothing but the bitter cold. Winter in Scotland isn't just a season to get through. It's a test of endurance, a constant reminder that survival depends not just on what you've gathered, but on your ability to withstand the elements day after day. Historians argue whether medieval Scots saw winter as something to be feared, or whether they simply accepted the reality of life in the cold. Some argue that the Scots built resilience into their daily lives, seeing the cold as just another obstacle to overcome. Others suggest that the constant struggle against the cold took a heavy toll on people's psychology, leading to a pervasive sense of hopelessness. Either way, there's no question that winter defined medieval Scottish life, and the struggle to survive through it was more than just physical. It was a test of the human spirit. As the days pass and the frost creeps into every corner of your home, you realize just how much of your life is tied to survival. The fire that flickers in the hearth isn't just warmth, it's life itself. Without it, the cold would take over completely. You're constantly feeding the fire, constantly maintaining it just to keep the chill at bay. But even as you try to stay warm, the cold never feels far away. It's in the walls, in the air, in the food you eat, in the clothes you wear. Even when you're inside, the cold feels like it's closing in. Historians debate whether medieval people were more sensitive to the cold than we are today, or whether they had a much higher tolerance for it. Some believe that the people of Scotland were so accustomed to the cold that they didn't feel it as acutely, that their bodies had adapted to the harsh winters. Others argue that the cold had a much more profound effect on medieval people, leading to sickness, fatigue, and mental strain. Either way, the cold was never something you could escape from. It was always present, always there, always demanding your attention. Even as you sit by the fire, warming your hands, there's a deep sense of unease that lingers. The cold never lets up. It creeps in, no matter how tightly you try to seal the doors and windows. And food, the one thing you can control, is always on your mind. You worry about whether you'll have enough to get through the next few months. Even the meager amount you've gathered doesn't seem like it will be enough to last through winter. The constant fear of hunger gnaws at you. Will the harvest be enough to get you through? Will you face another season of scarcity? Historians still debate whether starvation was a constant fear for medieval Scots, or whether they simply learned to cope with the hunger that often came with winter. Some believe that the famine was a real possibility for many, while others argue that people found ways to stretch their food stores, using preserved meats, grains, and whatever natural resources they could find to get by. Either way, there was always that lingering fear that winter's cold might be too much to survive, and that hunger would be your constant companion. As the days draw on and the cold continues its relentless assault, you begin to feel that even the smallest of comforts are becoming luxuries. The warmth from the hearth is fleeting. The food you manage to store feels insufficient, and even the company of your family doesn't offer the same solace it once did. There's a heaviness in the air, in your movements, in your thoughts. The grind of survival never lets up. Every day feels like a repeat of the one before. You're constantly preparing for something you can't fully control, whether the snow will come too early or whether the frost will kill off your crops before you even get a chance to harvest them. The cycle of survival is unending, and there's no break, no respite from the struggle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe. Down now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mental strain of constantly facing the elements is something that's hard to escape. It's a battle against the cold, the frost, and the harsh environment is fought not just in the fields or the house, but in your own mind. You wake up every day knowing that the same fight awaits you. There's little relief. In sight, just the grinding repetition of survival. And while you may have the strength to keep going, the weariness takes its toll. Every action is a struggle, every movement slow and labored, as you try to keep up with the demands of life in medieval Scotland. It's exhausting, physically and mentally. Historians debate whether the medieval Scots' resilience in the face of such adversity was a product of their circumstances or whether they were naturally adapted to endure hardship. Some suggest that their daily lives, shaped by the harshness of the land and weather, forged an unshakable mental toughness in the people, allowing them to face the cold with determination. Others argue that the constant grind of survival led to mental fatigue, and that it was this unyielding struggle that truly defined the medieval Scottish experience. Either way, the cold had a mental impact, one that went far beyond just physical discomfort. Even when the days feel endless and the work never stops, there's a sense of pride that comes with surviving. You've made it through another winter, endured another harsh season, and you've come out the other side still standing. That's no small feat. But even as you stand there, feeling the wind bite at your skin, there's still a nagging feeling that the next winter might be just as brutal. The future remains uncertain, and no matter how much you've prepared, you know that survival is always on the edge of your grasp. There's always the chance that you won't make it through, that the cold will prove to be too much this time. Historians still argue whether the medieval Scots' sense of pride in surviving harsh winters came from a collective will to endure, or whether it was simply an expression of individual strength. Some suggest that the constant fight for survival created a culture of community and mutual support, where people took pride in coming together to survive. Others argue that survival was more about individual resilience, with each person fighting alone to endure the harsh realities of life. Either way, survival was never about comfort, was about endurance, mental fortitude, and the determination to keep going. No matter the odds, as the cold persists, you begin to realize that there's no escaping it. It's not just the physical toll the cold takes, it's the mental exhaustion. You can't afford to rest, because the moment you let your guard down, you risk losing everything you've fought for. Winter is unforgiving, and no amount of preparation can ever fully protect you from its full force. It will take everything you have to survive. But even when you feel defeated, even when you feel the weight of it all crushing you, you know you can't give up. Survival is about endurance, about continuing when it feels like there's no reason to. Historians debate whether medieval Scots ever truly had moments of relaxation, or whether they lived their entire lives under the strain of survival. Some suggest that the struggle for survival was so constant that there was never a real moment of peace. Just brief moments of reprieve before the work started again. Others argue that, in spite of the hardships, the people found ways to celebrate the small victories, whether it was a successful harvest or surviving another winter. Either way, winter in medieval Scotland wasn't just a season, it was a way of life, and the ability to survive it was a testament to the resilience of the people. The winter months drag on, but in some strange way, you've grown accustomed to the ceaseless grind of it all. There are no restful days, no real breaks from the cold. Each day feels like a continuation of the one before it, a cycle of survival that repeats year after year. Your body is used to the ache in your muscles from working in the cold, and your mind has become numb to the constant awareness of how close you are to losing everything. But somehow, you keep going. It's as though you've become one with the environment, the biting cold, the frozen winds, the threat of starvation, and all you can do is endure. There's a strange comfort in it now, an acceptance of the struggle that has shaped your life. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe down now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The brutality of medieval life isn't just about surviving the cold or the physical labor, about mental endurance. Day after day, you endure the hardships, always looking forward to a time when it will be easier. But that time never comes. The mental toll of living on edge is something you begin to feel deeply as winter wears on. Every morning, you wake up, not to a peaceful, warm home, but to the reality of cold floors, a drafty home, and the perpetual task of surviving. And yet, you know you have to keep moving forward. If you stop, even for a moment, the cold might take you, the hunger might take you, or the winter itself might claim you. Historians debate whether medieval people truly understood the psychological strain of living through constant hardship, or whether they simply learned to ignore it. Some believe that the people of Scotland were more resilient mentally because they faced the same hardships day in and day out. Others argue that the unrelenting pressure of surviving in such a harsh environment led to a cynical outlook on life, where people began to expect nothing more than survival. Either way, winter and the cold shaped more than just the physical aspects of life. They shaped the mind and how people thought about survival. Even when the spring finally arrives, you realize that the cycle hasn't truly ended. The cold might retreat for a time, but it always comes back, always waits just around the corner. You've survived another season, but winter will return. Survival never feels like a victory in medieval Scotland. It feels like something you have to fight for every year. You've made it through, but you know you'll have to make it through again next season. Spring is no real relief, just the start of the next season of struggle. Even the land, as it begins to thaw, offers little guarantee that the future will be any less brutal. Historians still argue whether medieval Scots truly believed that winter was an inevitable part of life, or whether they thought that, with enough effort, they could finally conquer it. Some suggest that the endless struggle made people feel like they were always fighting against the elements, that they were constantly at war with the land and the weather. Others believe that spring was a moment of hope, even if just fleeting, when people could see life beginning anew. Either way, it's clear that winter was a reminder of the fragility of life in medieval Scotland, as you go through the motions Of preparing for the next season, you can't help but reflect on the battle that life in medieval Scotland is. It's not about grand achievements or comfortable living. It's about survival, barely making it through each season, each year, knowing that the next one could be even harder. The land you live on, the environment that surrounds you, is always a reminder of your mortality. It doesn't care about your dreams or your desires, it just tests you. And yet, every year, you rise up to meet the challenge. Every year, you keep going. Because to stop, to give up, would mean losing everything. Historians debate whether medieval Scots lived with a sense of inevitable survival, or whether each year was a struggle to prove their ability to endure. Some believe that people were driven by a sense of duty, that the constant hardship was a part of their identity, something they had to accept as part of life. Others argue that it was the hope of better days, the dreams of a better future, that kept people moving forward. Either way, winter remained the ultimate test of survival, and surviving it shaped the lives of the people who lived through it. As the seasons shift once again, you are reminded that survival in medieval Scotland isn't just about the harsh winters. It's about the constant cycle of toil, uncertainty, and adaptation. The brief reprieve of spring doesn't give much. Time to rest as the demands of survival take hold once more. Even as the land begins to thaw and new life begins to sprout, the weight of your struggle never fully lifts. You feel the tension in your muscles. The weariness in your bones sits the accumulated strain of months of enduring cold, hard labor, and a ceaseless battle against the elements. There's no true escape. You push forward because you have. 2. The challenge of surviving in Scotland is constant, and each season only brings a different facet of that same struggle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe down. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Even as you rise with the first light of spring, the stark reality of survival settles over you once again. The land seems to soften, but the work never stops. You must plant, gather, hunt, and prepare. The fear that the weather will turn against you is never far from your mind. You know that frost can still strike unexpectedly, that floods could come with the melt, and that there's no guarantee that the crops you plant will be enough to get you through the coming months. Spring, for all its promise, is still part of the same unrelenting cycle of survival, and with it comes the same risks and uncertainties. Historians debate whether medieval Scots viewed spring as a season of hope, or whether they simply saw it as another obstacle to endure. Some believe that the thaw brought relief, a sense of renewal after the long, dark months. Others suggest that the challenges of farming and gathering during this season meant that spring wasn't much of a reprieve, just another season to prepare for the harsh conditions of the coming winter. Either way, it's clear that no season was ever truly easy. The constant struggle to make a living means that every task becomes urgent. Each day brings a new challenge. From planting crops to maintaining shelter, every action is driven by the knowledge that survival depends on how well you manage your resources. The food stores you've carefully preserved might not last long, and there's always the risk that the livestock you've raised won't make it through the year. Even as you plant, you're always wondering, will there be enough? Will this year be better than the last? The stress doesn't end, it only shifts. Historians argue whether medieval people truly understood the economic cycle they were living through, or if the constant push to survive meant that they simply didn't have time to think about it. Some believe that medieval Scots had a deep quantitative understanding of how the seasons worked and how to balance their needs and resources. Others argue that the constant hardship left people with little time for long-term planning, as they focused on surviving from one day to the next. Either way, survival was never certain. It was a matter of being prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. The coming autumn will be just another reminder that the work is never over. As you look at the land, you know that the harvest could be bountiful. It could fail. You're never truly safe. Each season brings its own set of challenges, its own dangers. And even if the year has been good, you know that winter is never far behind. The cold will return, and with it, the cycle of survival will begin again. The only question is whether you'll be ready. Historians still debate whether medieval Scots ever felt that their efforts to survive were truly rewarded, or whether they simply lived through each season without ever truly enjoying the fruits of their labor. Some argue that the constant struggle to survive created a sense of pride in their ability to make it through, while others believe that the exhaustion of constantly working without respite led to a sense of resignation. Either way, life in medieval Scotland was a never-ending test of endurance, and the work to survive continued until the very end of each season, when the cold began its annual return. As autumn edges closer and the first signs of change begin to show, there's a heavy realization that the relentless cycle of survival has begun anew. The work isn't over. It never truly is. The crops are still being harvested, the livestock still need tending, and the land still demands attention. The air is turning cooler, and soon the winds will pick up again, signaling that winter is not far off. You feel the tension mount, knowing that everything you've worked for all year, everything you've sacrificed will soon be put to the test. The cold is coming, and it doesn't care about your plans. It will always be the great equalizer, the ultimate threat to your survival. But you push forward anyway, because you know you have no choice. You can only prepare and hope that this time you'll make it through. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The reality of medieval life is that there's no break. Even as the world seems to slow down with the change of seasons, the work continues. Your body aches from the long hours spent in the fields. Your hands are rough from labor, and your mind is always focused on the next task. Every season demands something different, but the cycle is always the same: survival, plain and simple. There's never a moment of true peace, just fleeting moments of reprieve when the work pauses, only to begin again in earnest. Historians still debate whether the constant work of medieval life left people with any sense of joy, or whether they simply endured out of necessity. Some believe that the struggle was a defining part of medieval life, a source of pride that built resilience over time. Others argue that the never-ending cycle of hard work led to a life of constant exhaustion, where joy was a rare and fleeting emotion. Either way, winter was always at the forefront of people's minds, a reminder that no matter how much you worked, the cold could take it all away in an instant. As you stand looking out over the land you've tended, there's a sense of dread that builds within you. The harvest may be better than last year, but you're still uncertain whether it will be enough. The land has always been unpredictable, and despite your best efforts, there's always a chance that the elements will undo all your hard work. Every year, you try to prepare more thoroughly, but somehow it never feels like it's enough. There's no guarantee that this winter won't be harsher than the last. There's no way to know for sure that you'll have enough food, enough firewood, enough shelter. You live with that uncertainty constantly. Historians argue whether medieval people ever truly felt that their farming and labor efforts were sufficient to ensure their survival, or whether they lived in a perpetual state of uncertainty. Some suggest that the work of planting, gathering, and preserving was seen as a shared responsibility, where community cooperation made survival more likely. Others believed that individual effort was more important, and the constant fear of scarcity meant that people always felt the weight of vulnerability. Either way, the winter months brought a new level of pressure, where everything you had done throughout the year could be undone by a harsh storm or an unexpected frost. In the face of all this uncertainty, the fight for survival continues. You're never truly at peace because you know that there's always something waiting to challenge your preparations. The winter can be long and brutal, and as it closes in, you can feel the mental toll of living in a place where the weather is both a source of life and a constant threat. And yet, you persevere because there's no other choice. You can't afford to give in. Every moment you spend trying to stay warm, trying to keep your family fed, means you've made it another day. You've survived for today, and maybe you'll survive tomorrow. But there's never any guarantee. Historians debate whether medieval Scots saw winter as a natural part of life that they were simply meant to endure, or whether they constantly fought against it, seeing the cold as a battle to be won. Some argue that survival was a matter of pride, that each winter conquered represented a victory over nature itself. Others suggest that medieval Scots saw the cold as a predetermined fate, something they could never truly escape from, only endure. Either way, winter remained the ultimate test of survival, a constant reminder of how fragile life could be in a land as unforgiving as Scotland. As winter settles in, the chill seems to sink deeper. You feel it in your bones, a gnawing cold that no amount of firewood or furs can truly stave off. The hearth crackles in the corner of the room, but it's more a comfort than a solution. The cold is unforgiving, and as the days drag on, your body begins to feel the toll of endless months of fighting against it. It's hard to remember the warmth of spring when the sun felt like a friend rather than an elusive memory. Now, the world around you is wrapped in a cold, white blanket of snow. Every step outside feels like an exertion of will, your body fighting against the wind that cuts through your layers. The fight for warmth, for survival, continues. And yet, you keep going. Not because it's easy, but because you must so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe. Down now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Every year, you face the same battle, the same grind against the cold, but even as you settle into the rhythm of winter, there's no denying that the uncertainty never leaves. Will the fire be enough to keep the cold at bay? Will your meager stores last through the season? Will your family stay healthy, or will the damp air take its toll? Every day feels like a reminder that no matter how much you've prepared, survival is never guaranteed. The cold ruthlessly strips away your comforts, leaving only the bare essentials. Historians debate whether medieval Scots were simply used to this cycle of survival, or whether it weighed heavily on them year after year. Some suggest that the constant struggle made people more resilient, that they built mental strength through the repetition of survival. Others argue that it left people emotionally drained, unable to enjoy life beyond the bare minimum needed to get by. Either way, the constant battle with the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, made survival in Scotland a relentless pursuit, one that tested the very limits of human endurance. As the snow continues to fall, you can't help but wonder, how much longer can you keep going? The cold doesn't just take away your warmth, it takes away your hope. Every day feels like a struggle, a fight to stay ahead of the inevitable. You begin to realize that survival is more than just enduring the cold, it's about mentally pushing through. And that's perhaps the hardest part of all. The grind becomes mental, a constant battle not just to survive, but to stay strong, enough to face each new challenge. Historians still argue whether medieval Scots ever truly adapted to the cold, or whether they were simply victims of it. Some suggest that their resilience was born from necessity, that they learned how to handle the cold simply because they had no choice. Others argue that the constant hardships took a psychological toll, leaving people unable to fully embrace life or find peace, even in the few moments when the cold eased. Either way, the cold was always there, always a constant presence, always testing their ability to endure as you sit by the fire. Watching the flames flicker, you realize that winter in medieval Scotland isn't just about surviving the cold. It's about surviving the mental toll that comes with the unpredictability of the land, the weather, and your circumstances. The fight against the elements is a test of willpower, one that never truly ends. Even when the harvest is bountiful, and you feel a rare sense of comfort, you know that winter is never far away. It is always lurking, just beyond the horizon, waiting to take away everything you've fought so hard for. Historians argue whether the people of medieval Scotland ever felt like they could escape the cold, or whether they simply accepted it as an inevitable part of life. Some believe that the cold became so ingrained in their daily existence that they learned to live with it, making it a part of their identity. Others suggest that the cold was something they fought against a foe they could never fully conquer, but one they had to face day after day. Either way, the cold was never something to be taken lightly. It was a force that defined life in Scotland. As the seasons inevitably turn and winter once again wraps its cold fingers around the land, you know that survival is no longer a question of whether or not you'll make it through. It's about endurance, plain and simple. Every winter feels like the last, and yet it never truly ends. The same challenges, the same grind of survival repeats itself year after year. But there is something in the human spirit that pushes through the most trying of times, even when the cold becomes unbearable. You find moments of solace in the smallest comforts: the warmth of a fire, the companionship of family, the satisfaction of completing a hard day's work. These fleeting moments of peace offer brief reprieve, but they never last. The battle is always there, just below the surface, waiting for the next winter to come. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. As winter draws in, you realize that it's more than just the cold that defines this time of year. It's the way the harsh elements shape everything around you. The land and its unyielding nature are always the backdrop to your existence. But it's the fight against the elements that truly defines life in medieval Scotland. Even the people you live with, ones you depend on for survival, are shaped by this struggle. In the village, everyone carries the same weight, enduring the same hardships. There's no space for luxury, no room for comfort, just the constant battle to stay alive. Historians argue whether the constant hardship in medieval Scotland made people stronger, or whether it simply wore them down year after year. Some argue that survival was a mark of personal resilience, a triumph over the most difficult conditions imaginable. Others believe that the long years of struggle led to a sense of resignation, where people could no longer feel joy, only grit and the will to carry on. Either way, survival was defined by acceptance, not victory. In the end, there is no grand celebration of surviving winter. There's no feast to mark the end of a brutal season, only the quiet awareness that the struggle continues. The work will start again. The cold will return, and you'll face it, just like you've always done. Life is defined by the next winter, the next harvest, and the endless struggle to make it through. Survival is the only goal, and in medieval Scotland, it's enough. Every year, you make it through. And when the next winter arrives, you'll still be standing. Historians debate whether medieval Scots ever truly found peace or comfort in their lives. Some argue that the constant fight for survival made people more connected to the land and to each other, while others suggest that the harshness of daily life made any sense of joy fleeting and temporary. Either way, the cold remained constant, and the challenge of surviving through it shaped the entire experience of life in medieval Scotland. As the last days of winter stretch into the thawing months, you feel the weight of what you've endured. The cold may have lost its bite for now, but the struggle you faced is not easily forgotten. It's not just the harshness of the seasons that marks you, it's the fight for survival that never really ends. You live to survive another year, and then another, and then another. In medieval Scotland, the ultimate victory wasn't in overcoming the cold. It was simply in still being here, still breathing, still enduring.